No, yeah, good. Oh gosh, lighter. I was like, no, I didn't bring it. I do have it. Anyway, I moved a little bit today, but hopefully the sun will go down a little bit, and then we'll be good, because that's not good. That's not good. Oh, there's a kitty. There's a kitty out here. I don't think it's mine. Hey! Hey! Kitties everywhere. Anyway, let's see. We are on chapter 17 this week. Almost done. 2 more weeks. It's getting chilly. Yes, always having issues with lighting. Oh well. Let's see. Who's out there? Nobody? Nobody's out there right now, so I can't start early. I can't start till everyone is here. I have to wait for some people to show up. Oh, my button popped. Well, I will talk to people who are watching this later. What's new? Planning to go visit a friend in France next month, I think. That'll be nice. Oh, I've been practicing archery. Did a little of that today. That's fun. I have to watch a couple more videos because I want to make sure I'm doing things right. I think I could get my arm a little straighter back there. I don't think I was doing that very well today. There was one person waiting. What happened? I'm here. And I did post a reminder. Well, did I post a reminder? I did post a reminder, yes, that I was going to a birthday party yesterday. And doing this today. Now I gotta wait for you guys. Hopefully this week I'll also record another video about smoking as Audrey. Kind of wrapping this up a bit. I mean, I will continue to practice, but probably not, regularly like this. I think I've gotten in a lot of good practice. I don't want to start reading before anyone's here. Oh, there's one person. Hi, welcome, or welcome back. Were you here before? 'Cause one person was here and then nobody. I guess today's, not a good day for this or something. But welcome. I was just kind of chatting to myself, and we can get started in a minute. I just wanted to make sure somebody was here, but not much to report. Doing archery today. Let's see, where are all my things? I have to say, okay, so I read these chapters ahead of time, and this one, World War II starts, and there's once in a while when I'm reading, maybe I should do some matches today too. It's been a while. Try some matches. Once in a while when I'm watching or reading things about World War II and other events, but for some reason, these World War II events, I get a little teary, a little emotional, and I don't really know why. I mean, a lot of things are sad, but sorry, just doing something here. But for some reason, sometimes when I'm reading or watching videos about World War II, something about it just makes me really sad. So I'm going to try not to cry when I'm reading. We'll see what happens. Okay, just seeing what I have here. I've got a couple of my mixes, a couple of Lucky Strikes, a couple of the ecstasy ones, the store-bought things. I was also thinking, I don't know if any of you out there have an opinion on this, but I was thinking for actors, we have different kinds of coaches for different things. And I was wondering if smoking coaches existed or if there's a demand for that for actors or historical, I don't know what other profession might actually need like a smoking coach, but as an actor, I think that could be, I don't want to say like in demand, but a legitimate career or job, being a coach for actors and teaching them how to smoke. And not that I would do that. You'd need like a real smoker for that, I think. But I was wondering if that existed or if actors would want that. Wait, I didn't bookmark. Hey, cat! Okay, where's the beginning of this chapter? Hello, kitty. Want to say hi? Say something. All right, chapter 17, and welcome everyone. Sorry to push this, although I know some people prefer Sunday to Saturday, so it's good that, you know, most people get a chance to join in when I'm live. What are you doing? Just checking out the tree. Yeah? Are you going to climb it? You going to sit there? Thank goodness they didn't bring me any presents today. I'm going to start keeping track. I got a butterfly yesterday, poor thing. Anyway, let's see. Let's get comfy. I like to prop that up. I'm itchy a little bit here, sorry. Okay. Let us begin. Sister Luke left the operating room of La Trinité at 5 o'clock in the morning. Sunrise was just about to break over the sandy flatlands, interspersed with lupin-covered dunes that rolled off northward toward the Holland border. It was May 10th, 1940, a day that she, her country, and the world were never to forget. There had been, as usual, the practice bombings that morning, closer in than they were accustomed to hearing. But for months now, the Belgian army had been completely immobilized. The great forts facing the line of the River Meuse had been manned, and military maneuvers were so familiar that they no longer suggested threat, especially to the nuns, who knew practically nothing about the war. The preparedness of their neutral country was interpreted as a gesture of prudence, and prudence, they reminded each other, with little approving nods, was a gift of the Holy Ghost. You did well to call me in the night for that case, sister, said the doctor. He bent over her slightly, too tall to look directly into her coif. You have a sure instinct for crises. He smiled his appreciation. I hope you can get some rest now that devilish practice is over. For a few moments there in surgery, I'd have sworn it was the real thing. She returned his smile and said nothing as she accompanied him to the main door, opening it for him with one of the many keys that hung from her leather belt. Though once off duty, she would not break the grand silence with speech. She stepped out with him for a breath of air after the long hours over ether. The May morning smelled fresh and sweet. Dawn turned the sky shrimp pink, and there were small puffs of white clouds drifting about in it. Such innocent little non-entities of clouds, she thought, remembering with a pang the mountains of charged cumulus that floated over the Congo about this time. The doctor looked up at the clouds with peculiar attention. Suddenly she sensed him stiffen beside her. Those aren't clouds, sister, the parachutes. It's an invasion, by God. He started running toward his car, crying back to her to get in and stay in. She stood transfixed, gripping her crucifix. The flower-like forms dropped out of the dawn with bodies dangling far beneath on cords. The sunrise picked up one at a time and made shine like the guidelines of spiders' webs. She could not realize that she was seeing the Germans come a second time. A second time, she whispered aghast. Just 26 years ago, and she was a child again, peering through the lace curtains of her grandmother's house at the Kaiser's death head hussars, I don't know, sorry, I can't pronounce, riding over the cobbles on magnificent matched black horses, with their capes spread over the prancing rumps and tall lances slanting up with the precision from the right stirrups. She thought they were princes out of a fairy tale until she heard her grandmother sobbing and saw her mother's face. Her childhood ended in that instant, but she didn't learn to hate until the foreign soldiers moved into their house, and she saw her mother and grandmother waiting on them like frightened servants and freezing into deathly silence each time they were asked about the whereabouts of her father. Cigarette time. Should I try with a match? I'll try it with a match. Oh dear. 'Cause it's been a while. Don't let me light the book on fire. All right, I survived that. Hate shook her as she watched them come, this time in a sinister kind of beauty and in total silence now that their bombardment had cleared the way. They were dropping only a few kilometers distant, onto the flats of the Netherlands, that had been the royal road into Belgium from Germany since time immemorial. The hate ran like flames through her blood, and she knew that if one of those distant paratroopers were to drop at that moment onto the pavings of a convent courtyard, she would have dashed out and tried to kill him with her bare hands. She heard her conscience saying, "Thou shalt not kill," as she killed them all deliberately with her thoughts. Then she spun on her heel and went back into the convent. She shut the door without locking it. Save the door, give them no excuse to batter it down when they come, she thought, and it did not seem strange that she knew such things automatically. She was late for chapel. Her 20 sisters had finished meditations and were reciting prime. She bowed to the superior, who never glanced her way. Then she stretched herself flat on the floor in penance for being late, leaning on her elbows with her face buried in her hands. She listened to her sisters chanting antique Latin, while Germans were dropping among the dunes no more than a healthy bicycle ride distant from the hospital. You had to squint your eyes, she remembered angrily, to see that the bulky forms were helmeted and carried assault arms. Months earlier, it had been rumored that Nazi spies were parachuting and dressed as nuns. They advanced reconnaissance in a predominantly Catholic country, it was said. After that, nuns who wished to were allowed to grow their hair without special permission, in case the police picked them up when duty took them to town, mistaking them for Germans in disguise. But I would know a Boche, dear God, even if he came dressed as the Blessed Virgin. I would know him by the hate that rises from my very soul. I never knew I had that hate until this morning. Was that why you let me see them come again? Or does it mean that you have use for a nun who can never be neutral? A nun, oh my God, who wanted to kill Germans as they'll kill my brother Antoine sitting at a peephole in the fortress of Namur, as they'll kill every patient in this hospital if food gets scarce enough, and they see all these members of your mystical body as no more than so many useless mouths to feed. I must have a stick in there. A sister plucked at her sleeve. She arose and went to her pew. She offered up her mass for the salvation of her countrymen, the souls in purgatory, for whom she most often gave her prayers, seemed to be by comparison in a much safer place. Her conscience forbade her to go to the communion rail with such a burden of hate in her heart. Her memory put that morning's breakfast under a bell jar, to be kept forever as a singular specimen. Mother Didima, who she knew had most certainly received a phone call long distance from the mother house, probably even before she herself had seen the parachutes, started the bread basket down the table with a cool nod, and then cut her own slice into the 4 small tartines she always made. Laying them out in a row on her wooden plank, she buttered them sparingly as usual. As usual, she took 2 level teaspoons of sugar in her coffee and then covertly watched the sugar bowl pass from hand to hand to see which sisters practiced self-denial. That day, by abstaining from sugar, a spiritual checkup, as it were, on the soul states of her small community. Sister Luke watched the superior's collected face while her ears strained through the silence for an untoward sound. At that moment, the Germans were crossing the Belgian frontier at 4 points. Their planes were bombing the Brussels airport. And the anti-aircraft batteries in the nearest town of Hasselt were opening up on the second wave of parachuters dropping over the eastern end of Belgium. Just as a faint ack-ack clattered from the direction of Hasselt, Mother Didyma plucked a coarse napkin from under her chin, laid it forward on the table, and went to the pulpit. "Hi, I'm reading." "Okay." "Benedicte," she said to her nuns. "Dominus," they replied, a little muted with surprise that something different was happening in the refectory this morning. A man forewarned is worth 2, said the superior, reading from a paper she had prepared. "Early this morning I had a telephone call from our Reverend Mother Emmanuel. At 3 a.m. Rotterdam was bombarded and many thousands killed. Belgium was bombarded at 5 o'clock. The country's system of sluices has been put into operation, and certain main roads are already blown up to prevent the German advance." Her voice was dry, without inflection. She might have been saying, "This is your assignment for today." She read on. Oh, that's getting a little close. Sister Luke was the only one not staring at the superior. She looked at the nuns one by one, at Sister Ignatius, whose brother was with hers in Namur, at Sister Tarsisius, whose family in Maastricht was probably already in German hands, and Sister Beatrice, whose father commanded the fortress of Liège. As she looked at them, her memory put them also under the bell jar as exquisite details in a singular specimen of a life that was not of this world. Not a flicker of fear or anguish showed on any face. "I tell you this, only that you will be prepared," said Mother Didyma. "There will be panic in the hospital. Our lay student nurses, of course, will have been listening to their radios. They will doubtless all want to run off to rejoin their families. Your sole preoccupation must be to keep them here and the patients calm. Our work must go on as if nothing has happened." 3 bursts of artillery from the south broke into her speech. She paused as for an ill-bred interruption. Then she went on. "It is your responsibility to set the example of courage and calm. Tickles. And draw the others after you like little sheep. Remember, God loves us and will take care of us." She folded her paper. "All further developments will be posted on the bulletin board," she said, looking at them sharply to make sure that all understood there was to be no war talk in her community. For the first time since she had joined the community, Sister Luke felt a flash of admiration for her chilly, inscrutable superior. The next 18 days ran together like a prolonged nightmare, in which afterward there was no memory of emotions, but only of endless sequences of actions, quick, cool, and unprecedented. Refugees poured into the convent hospital, first from Holland, then from all the eastern provinces of Belgium, and the nuns tightened their belts as their own slender reserves of food were shared with the frantic multitude. Every corridor and foyer was filled with cots and wheelchairs, and when these gave out, the nuns threw mattresses down. The refugees elaborated with their wild reports, the brief notices that appeared on the bulletin board. The Albert Canal breached by the enemy on May 17th, the fall of Brussels on May 19th, Malines and Louvain occupied and half the Belgium already overrun. More believable were the letters from the Reverend Mother Emmanuel, which were thumbtacked beneath a neatly chalked caption, "Some recommendations from the Mother House." The Superior General exhorted the sisters to be discreet with strangers, to make no search for their families without permission, to take no part in patriotic affairs, and to consider the privations in food as penance and abstinence enough without adding any extra self-denials of their own accord. Lucky strike. The national food shortage, of which we are already warned, she wrote, will be enough penance to satisfy even the most scrupulous conscience. On May 26th, the Bulletin Board announced that the remnants of the Belgian army, parts of the British Expeditionary Force, and of the 9th French Army were fighting with their backs to the sea at Dunkirk. On May 28th, that carried in a single bleak sentence the news that King Leopold had signed a surrender. The sisters, wrote the Superior General, are urged not to accept or read any of the clandestine newspapers of the underground which have already begun to appear in the provinces under German occupation. In the fury of those 18 days that ended with the shocking surrender of her king and country, Sister Luke, without being aware of it, did her first job for the Belgian underground. On the evening of the day Brussels fell, a middle-aged man dressed like a farmer and carrying a small canvas zipper bag came in with a cartload of refugees. But he was a patient. He bore a slip referring him to Sister Luke, specifically to a private room in her tuberculosis wing, which was momentarily vacant. The slip was signed by a doctor who had not visited the hospital since the start of the Blitz. She wondered how that doctor had known about the vacant room as she led the man through the crowded corridors and up 2 flights of stairs. At the door of the room, the patient asked her not to let any nurse visit him in the night. He had to have sleep, he said, absolutely undisturbed. Then he asked her to make one more exception to hospital practice and to come to him at 4 the next morning. "Just you alone, sister," he said in a low voice. Even in a war, nuns did not arise at 4 to visit strange men in private rooms without first asking the superior's permission. Sister Luke knew that if she asked, her request would be denied, since she could give no reason to support it. She debated uneasily with her conscience, weighing a deliberated disobedience against something she had seen in the man's eyes, a shadow of urgency that implored her to keep his peculiar request to herself. It was dark next morning when she tapped on his door. He opened immediately. He was fully dressed and waiting for her. He shut the door soundlessly, then turned and said, "Will you assist me in serving the Mass, sister?" With the practiced control now second nature, she concealed her surprise and nodded. Swiftly he opened his zipper bag and handed her a small altar stone, a missal, a standing crucifix, and candles. He had already spread a linen over the bed table. He set up his altar while he shook out vestments of thinnest silk. The travelling fathers of the Congo used to carry such compact vessels and vestments when they took the church into the churchless bush. A thrill went through her as she realized she was assisting one of those priests who was going to try to get out of Belgium to Spain, and thence perhaps to England or the United States, before the Nazis would have time to round him up and give orders on what was to be preached. He had to be someone in a high position to have received permission to say his Mass outside the sanctified enclosure of a church. She listened to him murmuring the vested prayers as he dropped the silk garments over his farmer's clothes. Presently he stepped back from the bed table, as though there were 3 altar steps between him and it, and she knelt behind him with fast-beating heart. She watched his beautiful, shapely hands that had never touched a plough. They would betray him unless he rubbed dirt on them. She made a mental note to suggest this after the Mass. Then she heard his priest voice, low and reverent, "In nomine Patris." The familiar functional hospital room became, for the next 21 minutes, a house of God. It's very, very precise, 21 minutes. When the prayers ended, the priest packed his vessels and linens, then turned to her with a smile. "God bless you, sister," he said. "Now, if you could just get me a cup of coffee." She used the service stairs to the kitchens, so no one would see her. When she returned to the room, the priest was gone. The lamp on the bed table was left lit to draw her eyes to a note propped against it. "Pray for me," was written on the scrap of paper in the clear slant script of the Jesuit school. She carried the note beneath her scapular, just above her heart, for as many days as she thought it would take a man to tramp the treacherous road southwest toward France. It gave her a lively sense of participation, as though something of herself were out there in the dangerous world, dodging Germans, seeking hideouts and hedgerows and barns when the tanks thrust over the horizon. Her latent patriotism, which had seemed like a harmless atavism, came alive and began to beat within her like a strong and steady pulse. She listened deliberately now to the talk of her student nurses, who, being in the lay world, had many connections with the outside. She heard that the Ardennes, through which her priest would undoubtedly travel, were entirely in German hands. She prayed to the Blessed Virgin to show him the trails she had used in her mountain climbing days, far from the main highways, which were said to be living streams of fleeing humanity, over which Nazi planes swooped with machine guns blazing. She could not know as she prayed, with the safety of an unknown priest, that her own father was also travelling those risky roads towards France. She had forbidden herself to ask permission to trace her family, as had most of the nuns. The suffering of not knowing where the loved ones were was an extra little cross you could carry in his name. Sister Luke wished only that in her last letter to her father at Easter, she had asked him if what Tante Colette had said was true, that he would have to leave the country should the Germans ever come again. But the thought of such personal matter passing under the eyes of Mother Didyma, and provoking in the next recreation a comment about the heroic imagination of a certain sister, had restrained her. Food became scarcer, and the nuns became hungrier. No one inside the convent had yet seen a German. Ambulances appeared regularly outside the hospital, loaded with casualties picked up from the Straft highways. Priests were often in charge. Sister Luke photographed them with Red Cross armbands pinned over the sleeves of their black soutanes, and the ambulances with bullet holes punctured cleanly along the horizontal arms of the Crimson Cross painted on their sides. She had no idea for whom she was making this documentary of inhumanity. Meanwhile, the clandestine newspapers, which the nuns were requested not to read, were beginning to circulate. A fleeing priest had said "God bless you" for her first deliberate defection from the rule of obedience. It encouraged her to make another. She stimulated her student nurses to read and report on the brave little news sheets, of which one copy, it was said, was laid every day on the desk of the Lieutenant General Baron Alexander von Walkenhausen, who was now the Nazi military commander of all Belgium. No one ever knew who put the annoying sheets daily on his desk. The underground news sheets published the names of Belgian collaborators who had accepted appointments from the Germans as burgomasters of their captured towns, and the information that Belgian bishops had been instructed by the cardinal to refuse Holy Communion to those who consorted with the enemy. The Belgian collaborators were called Kisslings, a word Sister Luke pondered and could not solve because she had never heard that just before the Blitz which captured her own country in 18 days, there had been a preparatory Blitz that had subdued Norway. One of her students told her who Kissling of Norway was, and how the hated name had come into their own language as a proper noun everybody understood. And I looked it up, and now I can't remember the story. It's spelled Quisling, and it's a last name. "Everybody except us," said Sister Luke, smiling at the student who she suspected was involved in the underground. Because everything in the hospital went on as if normal, she took the telephone calls that came for her students. She would say, "I regret, monsieur, that mademoiselle cannot accept telephone calls while on duty," and would listen to the voice that tried to sound like a priest, saying, "I am Father John, sister. This is urgent." She would call the girl then and look at her face afterwards, shrouded in secrecy, but not enough to conceal the flush of excitement. Then the student would ask permission to go into the town for an hour. One night Sister Luke climbed the stairs to the dormitory of the students above the wing where the nuns slept. The girls were clustered about their radio, listening to a voice speaking French with a thick German accent. A glowing offer of work inside Germany was being broadcast to all unemployed Belgians. Excellent working conditions and high wages were offered. Sister Luke waited a few moments, eagerly gathering news seldom published on the convent bulletin board. Then she tapped the shoulder of the girl who received the most telephone calls. Of all her students, this was the one closest to her heart. Lisa's delicate face made her think of the begonia of the Congo that bruised to the touch. Her grey eyes, fringed with dark lashes, held such a look of childlike innocence that the procuratrice nun often asked permission to take her on shopping trips, and it made no difference then to the shopkeeper if the convent's ration books had run out of sugar or flour stamps. "Sister Luke," Lisa stood up at once. "Has anything happened in the wards?" First thought for the patients always. Sister Luke smiled at her own handiwork as she shook her head. The instilling of that flame-like dedication in Lisa had been the saving grace of the bleak year under a superior to whom, despite all her prayers and what she thought they had in common, she had not been able to open her heart. She drew Lisa over near the door where the beamed mansard started its downward slant. Then she said with a slight inflection of protectiveness, "Wasn't that excuse to go out again today a mere fantasy, like Lisa? You've used that sick uncle twice, don't you remember?" Let's see. This one. I hear a cat. "Oh, sister, did I?" Lisa looked at her with confidence crystallizing in her wide grey eyes. Then she said in a hurried whisper, "We are distributing food ration stamps to our boys hiding out, sister," making her one of them with the unexpected admission. "There are scores already right here in our own town who refuse this offer from the Germans, sister. They've never registered for the ration books. They must have food stamps to pay the farmers who hide and feed them. The stamps are brought to us from Brussels, where they're printed. We never know by whom, only that we must always go at once." Sister Luke stopped her with a gesture. "That's enough, Lisa," she said. "I won't ask for more." "I won't because I cannot," she thought with a flare of longing that made her wish to be free like the girl standing before her. Free to fight Germans, to connive against them and deliver stolen food stamps to boys the ages of her two youngest brothers, who were probably among those hiding out in haylofts of patriotic farmers. "If ever I can be of help, Lisa," she said very low, "tell me." She turned to leave, then thought of something helpful. "If it's possible to inform your intermediary," she whispered, "tell him not to say over the phone that he is a priest. Any nun would know at once that he is not and never was one." She gave her student one of her rare smiles. Those urgent, worldly intonations were bred out of a priest's voice long before ordination. The next time Sister Luke took a call for Lisa, the intermediary called her by name. "I heard of your help, Sister Luke," he said. "Thank you and God bless you." That evening her conscience made her stand a long time before the bulletin board to read again the Reverend Mother Emmanuel's exhortation to all nuns not to engage in patriotic activities. It doesn't say forbidden, she told herself, but her conscience reminded her that the Superior's wish was accepted instantly as law in the hearts of every rule-abiding nun. Had any of the quiet sisters around her transgressed as she had? She knew she would never know. The underground is as sealed as the confessional, she thought. What I do from now on is between me and God alone. There were small pockets of Allied forces isolated in many parts of Belgium. The underground secreted them and tried to get them out. Sister Luke met her first German face to face the day she accepted a British flyer and put him in the private room the fleeing priest had occupied. The familiar voice of the intermediary, who no longer tried to sound like a priest, had said over the telephone, "You'll receive a package of cigarettes in about an hour, sister. British made, enough for one night only." She found work to do among the stretchers that littered the foyer. 1 hour after the telephone call, an ambulatory case dressed in the rough clothes of the ploughman, with a knit cap pulled down partway over head bandages expertly wrapped, came in the door, her package of cigarettes. How she knew with instant certainty that the man was her British flyer was one of the mysteries of intuition which she would have called God's guidance had she stopped to think about it. She went forward at once and took him by the arm. cough," she whispered in English as she led him upstairs to the tuberculosis wing. The man coughed, so all the foyer could hear. The bells for vespers rang as she slipped him, unseen by her nurses, into the private room. "I'm going to lock you in," she whispered. "I'll bring food later." Sorry, it's a little chilly and my nose is a little runny. She reached the chapel just in time to take her place near the head of the line with the youngest sisters who entered first. Mother Didymer brought up the rear. During the devotion, Sister Luke planned what she would do to make the private room safe from night inspection. After feeding her flyer, she would tape up the outside of the door and stand the formaldehyde machine in front of it as though the room had been fumigated after a death. It was a customary sight in her wing. In her office she kept a supply of newspapers cut into strips for the taping, and a pot of flour mixed with water, which served as paste in her poverty-vowed congregation, which never bought anything that an inventive nun could make. The nuns were chanting the final prayers when Sister Luke saw from the corner of her eye the porter nun approach the prie-dieu of Mother Didymer and slip a note upon it. Her heart began to pound. Even before she saw the look that came over Mother Didymer's face, she knew that the Germans were in the hospital. Only an arrogant conqueror could have persuaded the portress to interrupt an office. Only frantic anxiety for her patients could have made the scrupulous superior leave the chapel before the end of a devotion. Mother Didymer's eyes caught hers as she arose precipitately. I don't use that word. Mental telepathy, the language of nuns, flashed the warning. A minute later, Sister Luke stood up and awaited her turn to leave the chapel. Youngest in the life, first in and last out, she almost screamed. Then she saw the side exit through the sacristy and took it. She snatched newspaper strips and paste pot from her office as she hurried past it. She dragged the formaldehyde machine from the closet and stuffed its feeder tube through the keyhole of the flyer's door. Then she started to paste up the strips. She counted the wards below which would be inspected first. The general surgery, the maternity, the contagious, then up one more flight, and hers. The flour paste had dried to a springy consistency. She had no time to fetch water to thin it. She fought it. She got the strip across the top crack of the door and down the hinged side. Then she heard boots on the stairs and Mother Didymer's dry voice saying more loudly than she ever spoke, "Up here we have our TB cases." She knows, Sister Luke thought. She must have seen me bypass the admissions office when I brought him up. A strip of gummy paper wrapped around her wrist. She tore it off, prepared another, and was standing up and patting it down the latch side of the door when the inspection party came around the corner of the hall. "Oh God," she prayed, "give me the strength to carry this off." And she helped God by reminding him that he had the Germans' ready-made fear of contagion to work upon. "And what's this?" said a guttural voice in massacred French. She ran her hand down the strip to within a foot of the floor and turned around. She gave the two German officers a smile, nun-like, sweet and startled, as her eyes swept from their gold-braided caps to the iron crosses ribboned close about their necks, beneath velvet tunic collars, then moved on obediently to her superior to ask, with humble lift of eyebrows, if she might have permission to speak. Mother Didymer nodded. "We are fumigating, mein Herren Offizier," she said in the perfect German that her father had ordered all his children to learn before taking them to Germany to show them his student haunts. "One of our most virulent cases, a spitting of blood at the end." The two officers stepped back a pace. "But a happy death, thank God," she said, looking straight into the blue eyes of the officer who had the most pips on his shoulder straps. "Ein Heiling Messinger Todd." I don't know. I don't know German. He repeated, amused. I guess he said a happy death. Thank God, I don't know. He clacked his booted heels and saluted her. "We are happy, Schwester, that you keep your rooms so clean of infection. Perhaps," he bowed to Mother Didymer and switched his speech to the tongue-scorching French, "perhaps we shall require these rooms one of these days, if the Reverend Mother will permit." Our roster of vacancies is at your command, said Mother Didyma with a frigid smile. As the officer moved on, the superior gave her an oblique look that said, Now I understand some letters from previous superiors that are in your file. Letters that suggested you might be a revolutionary in the life, that you are too enterprising, that you bring the world into the cloister, though you never show it unless pushed or pressed. Sister Luke bowed, then knelt to paste the final newspaper strips along the crack between threshold and floor. She took a long time to do that last easy strip. She talked to God as she patted the pasty paper into place. I'm no longer one of your obedient brides, she said. Yet you answer me when I cry out for your help. You enable me to gaze naively at men I hate and answer them in their own language, which I have not thought of or practiced since childhood. Wait. Oh, I'll do this one. Getting carried away. Where are you taking me, blessed Lord, and for what purpose? You gave me 14 years of the Holy Rule as armor for today to save this one life. Was it for this that you would not send me back to the Congo? Before she had closed the crack, she whispered through it. Everything is in order. I'll leave the door unlocked. You can break through these strips when you leave tomorrow before dawn. I regret I couldn't get food to you before they came. I'll leave a packet of bread tonight in my office. Second door to the right as you go out. 2 raps answered her as she applied the last strip. Soothsayers appeared while the Nazis were organizing their captured provinces. Sister Luke heard about them from her students in the strange, hushed quiet that followed the conquest. With most main roads destroyed and most bridges demolished, communication in Belgium was reduced almost to the level of feudal times. The soothsayers arose all over the land like a ghostly revival from the Middle Ages. They travelled about with a map of France and a pointed pendulum on a string, which operated like a plumb line. They held the pendulum over various cities of France, and where it began to circle, there, they said, is your lost family. Lisa, she observed, was the only one of her students who showed no interest in the soothsayers. Sister Luke wondered if it was to imitate the nuns in their attitude towards sorcery, or if it was because the girl's connections with the underground were so well established as to give her perfect assurance about the welfare and whereabouts of her family. Since their talk together under the eaves of the students' dormitory, there had been no sign from Lisa that any world other than the suffering tuberculosis wards existed for her. The first it's everywhere. The first soothsayer to come from the hospital to offer family search services to the patients was a middle-aged woman of the shopkeeper type. The nuns permitted her entry and pretended not to look. Sister Luke heard the exclamations of patients and began to look. Rouen, but of course, one cried. Why didn't I think of it myself? That's where my wife's family originated. Or Tours. Papa is in Tours. There was a business connection there. The little pendulum moved from city to city over the map of France and tempted her to test it. She block-printed her father's name, profession, and place of former residence on a slip of paper and gave it to one of her patients to present. From an open case who cannot be visited, she said. I've committed every sin now except theft and adultery, she thought as she patrolled the ward while the soothsayer worked her plumb over the map. Appetite comes with eating was an old Flemish proverb. It flashed through her mind as she paced. Presently, she heard the soothsayer. Vandermel, that's a familiar name. The flurried breathing of her patient told her the plum was swinging. Then the soothsayer announced, Bordeaux, and her patient, who had given the name, cried, Sister, see how strongly it circles. She went over to the bed to see. The delicate, derisory smile about her lips belied the thudding of her heart. Of course he would have got through, she thought, with his ribboned rosette and his lapel, which so closely resembled the French Légion d'honneur. He would have been able to get petrol throughout France where no one else could. He travelled light, she was sure, just his black satchel of medical instruments and the meerschaum pipe if he had to flee in a hurry, and no more than one suitcase of clothes if he had had advance warning. You can go around the world in one suitcase when it's properly packed, he used to say. She knew what it must have cost him to leave his sanatorium and the special patients whose cases he had been studying for years. She was certain that Tante Colette was not with him, that doughty soul would have elected to remain behind to hide the family silver and the monogrammed linens against the day when her idolized brother would come home again. Sister Luke took another notch in her belt, but felt no hunger pangs. The vision of her father safe in Bordeaux, or as safe as anyone could be, in a place the Germans had not yet invaded, compensated. Up my nose. That he was alive after traversing those dangerous highways to the west was more than enough to thank God for. Not until she was in the chapel that evening, making her examination of conscience, did she realize that she had fallen like a simpleton into a charlatan's trap when she had pinned her faith to a bronze plum on a string instead of putting it on the altar at which she stared. I'm covered in this. Then one day Lisa signaled her with her eyes. Sister Luke glided out of the ward to the treatment room to await her. The girl came in with a medication tray. "I heard the Germans are coming again tonight, sister," she whispered. "I had a package of newspapers to distribute. Sister, I didn't know what to do with it until tomorrow." She pleaded with her eyes, and so, sister, the packet of clandestine newspapers was in Sister Luke's desk, since Lisa knew she had the second shift that night, from 11:30 until 8 the next morning. Why is that one burning my nose? Sister Luke sat at her desk and pretended that the forbidden newspapers were not there in the second drawer to the left. She had slept from the salve until 11, when the night nun had plucked at her pillow. She turned over in her hand the chocolate bar the Superior had given her to eat just before midnight, to carry her through the crippling second shift in which nuns had to fast from food and water until the morning mass. She wondered where Mother Didymer procured such luxuries for her night nurses in wartime. To make up for her many sins of a commission, she examined the chocolate bar's Swiss wrapping, read all the gold print on it, smelled it once and put it in her pocket. She would give it tomorrow to one of the laundry nuns who had never had night duties and never saw chocolate bars. She knew she was doing all sorts of small things to keep herself from opening the drawer to look at the papers the Reverend Mother Emmanuel wished her nuns not to read. Presently she opened the drawer. She glanced at printed sheets bound with a cotton string. The lead story was dated June 23rd, 1940, and stated that at 6:15 that day, the French had signed peace terms with the Nazis to go into effect 6 Sanitaire, and had pushed on to within 80 when the capitulation was announced. Bordeaux. She pulled a paper from the string and read the whole story. She turned the sheet over, telling herself, "I've gone this far, I may as well finish, God help me." There was a note about the German Siegfried Line, designed by Dr. Fritz Todd, running from Holland to the Swiss border, which was already under bombardment by the Allies, and a warning to Belgians not to sign up for any work inside Germany, especially for the current mass recruiting program called the Todd Plan. Another article signed by the Archbishop of Malines, and I'm sorry, something's happening with the internet. Let's hope it can hold out a couple more pages. Many papal powers, she read, have been delegated meanwhile to the Cardinal, who will remain in the occupied country. Many papal powers. She repeated the 3 words silently, trying to think what they meant. Then her eyes caught the boxed story at the bottom of the page captioned "Murder on the Meuse." It read at first like one of the stories the refugees told. There was a section of the Meuse below Dinant, in the peninsula of France, which thrust up into Belgium at that point. Somewhere... I don't know what's going on with the internet today. Oh, okay. He refused to take to the ditches until he had given first aid to the wounded scattered throughout the adjacent fields. Then he had recited the prayers for the dead, standing there bareheaded in the field, the article said, looking straight up at the Stuckers as he prayed. Then he started towards the ditches. The next wave of Stuckers caught him. We drew his body into the ditch after afterwards and removed his rosette of the Order of Leopold. If his son, Antoine Vandermel, will get in touch with us, we will deliver the ribbon. Shock stiffened her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, soundless as water over marble. Her frozen exterior contained a storm of grief, letting no sob or moan emerge. For a long time she sat there clutching the paper. Then there were sounds on the stairs, the flurry of a nun's slippers, hurrying ahead of boots. She thrust the paper into the drawer as the porteress came into the office. 2 Germans, sister, inspecting. The men of the Gestapo stood outside. They informed her they were making a blackout inspection. They examined the small, dim bulb in her desk lamp and the black paper shade pulled down over the office window. Any other lights on this floor, sister? She made a sign of 3 with her fingers and led them down the corridor to show the 2 small lights in the wards and a vigil lamp in a private room where a woman lay under an oxygen tent. She held her clenched fists beneath her scapula as she walked beside them, looking straight ahead, her coif cutting off her face so that they did not see its storm of hate. And that's the end of chapter 17. And I made it through without crying. As I said in the beginning, when I was reading the chapter before, like, I don't know, there's some, come on. Like World War II, certain things there, like when the war started, like I was reading it, like started crying. I'm like, oh no, I hope I don't cry when I'm reading, like out loud here. And I didn't. I don't know, something about focusing to read and smoke at the same time, I guess keeps me on track. So, we made it. Don't know what's up with the internet. I guess I'll say goodbye because it doesn't seem like it wants to stay connected. And it's been almost an hour. I uploaded a new video. That's new. Last night. It does. All the wars do. You know, it maddens me that people think war is an answer to anything. I think if leaders of a country have an issue, they ought to solve it together. Like, they battle it themselves, just them. Like, I want your country. Okay, you and president of this country, you go fight it out. Like, don't send innocent people. What's that quote? When the elephants fight, the grass suffers. Something like that. Yeah, I wish I could go live on a different planet. Somewhere where, I don't know, people would ruin another planet too. I've looked into starting my own country, but I think I need nuclear weapons and a lot of money. So that's not happening. I uploaded a new video last night. It's a longer one. It's about the Sabrina dress. Part of it is about the actual Sabrina dress, and part of it is about my Sabrina dress. There are some other things I could have included and I either forgot or just, thought it was too long to add to. But I do have a new video up, finally. And, I have some others in mind. It's just not going to be weekly anymore. I'm on TikTok, just Kendall Brenneman. Instagram as well, Kendall in Wonderland. Just in case you're interested. And I guess I'll say goodbye before it cuts me off again. So thanks for coming this week. Next week should be fine. Saturday evening again. If anything comes up, I will let you know. But I think we're still good for Saturday. So thanks for joining. 2 more chapters to go. And yeah, wow, it's been 17 weeks and still haven't gotten rained out. So that's cool. And I will see you next week, or end of this week, I guess, since it's Sunday. So have a good evening.